The snow had long since melted from the Saskatchewan fields when the miracle truly revealed its meaning. What began on that cold April morning, a storm, a nameless cow, and 4 fragile calves lying in the snow, had grown into something far greater than survival. It had become a testimony. For weeks, the Van Hastert family lived in a rhythm of sacrifice and devotion, pouring every ounce of love and labor into keeping those impossibly small bodies alive. Each night, as Mark stumbled from the barn with aching bones and eyes clouded with exhaustion, he would whisper the same verse in his heart: "The righteous care for the needs of their animals, but the kindest acts of the wicked are cruel." And somehow, the calves responded. Orangala, Greenola Pibuthni, and nobody names born from laughter in the storm, began to stand stronger, to drink more eagerly, to push against blankets as if life itself had taken root in their veins. What once seemed like a desperate fight for survival slowly turned into a living, breathing, animal miracle. The kind of story whispered across communities, carried across nations, destined for viral YouTube headlines about animal rescue, touching animal story, and dramatic wildlife survival. But the miracle did not stop with them. Something awakened in the ranch itself. Neighbors who had once been distant began arriving daily, bringing milk replacer, wood for the fire, even hot meals for the sleepless family. A quiet ranch on the edge of Saskatchewan became a sanctuary where human and animal connection pulsed. Like a heartbeat, for the whole creation waits in eager expectation for the children of God to be revealed. The Van Hasterts felt it in every hug from a neighbor, in every letter mailed from strangers across the globe, in every moment when children pressed their faces against the barn windows to catch a glimpse of 4 living wonders. Survival had turned into unity, struggle had transformed into community, and the family realized this wasn't just their story anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in life, in hope, in the untamable bond between humanity and nature. The calves grew steadily, though nobody, the smallest, still required constant watch. For Mark, she became more than a calf. She was a mirror of his own resilience. Late one night, when the storms had gone, and the fields shone silver under a spring moon, he sat on a hay bale, nobody's tiny head resting against his lap. Her breath was shallow but steady, her heart still fighting in rhythm with his. Tears fell onto her fur as he whispered, "Not one sparrow falls to the ground outside the Father's care." Matthew 10:29, and in that moment, nobody stirred, stretched her fragile neck, and let out the faintest cry. It was as if she had answered him, as if heaven itself had leaned down to whisper back, "Life is still here, still sacred, still beautiful." By the time summer came, the calves were strong enough to run across the fields. Cameras caught them leaping beside their mother, now named Somebody, for she had proved she was never just another cow. Viral clips spread online under titles like "Heartwarming Animal Video," "Quadruplet Calves," "Beat the Odds," and "Unbelievable Animal Rescue Miracle." On a Canadian ranch, millions watched as Orangala, Greenalapi, Bluthoni, and Nobody galloped together, their coats glistening, their survival no longer fragile but triumphant. And each time they ran, Mark and Aaron stood at the fence, hands entwined, tears streaming, freely, because they knew this was more than cattle. This was proof that life finds a way, that even in a frozen field where death seemed certain, love and faith could carve out survival. With God, all things are possible. In the end, the miracle was not just for calves, it was the transformation of an entire family, an entire community, perhaps even the world of those who watched from afar. What was once a bet between brothers over coffee became a testimony of hope broadcast in every corner of the globe. The Van Hasterts realized that in saving these calves, they themselves had been saved from routine, from despair, from forgetting the sacredness of creation. And as the sun set on another day, with laughter echoing through the pastures and 4 calves chasing fireflies in the fading light, Aaron whispered the words that had carried them through every storm: "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." This was not just a farm story. This was not just a viral YouTube story. This was the living cry of nature, answered by humanity, an animal miracle, a survival against all odds, a heartwarming animal rescue that bound a family, a community, and millions of strangers together. And in the stillness of that Saskatchewan evening, it was clear, love had won the Saskatchewan miracle. Headlines would later proclaim, 1 in 11.2 million birth defies all odds. But before the world celebrated, before the story became an international viral YouTube sensation about survival, animal rescue, and touching animal stories, there was one night that nearly ended everything, the turning point, the night that tested the strength of man, beast, and faith itself. It was April 20th, 2024. At exactly 2:17 a.m., the storm was still raging outside, snow whipping like white knives across the prairie, the wind roaring so loud it rattled the barn doors and made the whole structure groan like an ancient ship at sea. Inside, Mark moved quietly through the heated barn, a flashlight in hand, the beam cutting through shadows of hay and rising steam. He checked each of the calves, just as he had done countless times since their impossible birth. 3 of them, Orangala, Greenalapi and Bluthoni, lay curled together beneath the warmth of the heat lamps, their tiny chests lifting and falling with steady breaths. But the smallest, the one they had called Nobody, the fighter of fighters, the miracle. Within the miracle lay on her side, still, silent, and cold. Mark's world collapsed in an instant. No, 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 his whisper cracked into the night as he dropped to his knees beside her. He pressed his ear to her tiny chest, desperate, trembling. And in that moment, the silence inside her body felt louder than the storm outside. No heartbeat, no breath. The calf was gone. A cry tore through him, raw and desperate, cutting across the howling wind. Aaron, Aaron, get out here now. His voice echoed through the rafters like a prayer and a scream tangled together. Without a thought, he scooped up her limp body, his hands shaking, his own heartbeat pounding so loud it felt like the barn itself shook with it. He began compressions on her fragile chest, the way he had once seen Dr. Peterson do with newborns. Push, push, breathe into her nostrils. Push, push. Again, her body was ice, her neck limp, his tears fell into her fur, and still he pushed. Aaron came running, barefoot and frantic, her nightgown whipping in the wind as she burst into the barn. The sight froze her husband, on his knees in the straw, pumping life into what looked like a lifeless calf. What's happening? She gasped, though the answer was already written in the scene. Is she? I don't know. Mark's voice cracked, torn between rage and heartbreak. She's not breathing. Her heart stopped. He tilted Nobody's head back again, breathing desperately into her nostrils, watching, begging, pleading for any sign of life. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Aaron grabbed towels and heating pads, her hands trembling but her voice fierce. Don't stop, Mark. Don't you dare stop. Keep going. Just keep going. For 20 excruciating minutes, time became torture. Compressions, breaths warming her with lamps and towels, compressions again. Mark's arms ached, his chest heaved with sobs, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Stay with me, little girl. You're the fighter. Please, fight." The barn smelled of sweat, hay, and desperation. Tears streaked Aaron's face as she held the lamps closer. Finally, her voice broke into a whisper. "Mark, maybe we should know," he roared, voice echoing like thunder in the storm. "She's not giving up, and neither am I." And then, it happened. A sound so small, so fragile, they almost thought they imagined it. A faint gasp, a flicker of eyelids, and then the weakest, most broken little cry they had ever heard. "She's back," Mark sobbed, collapsing over her tiny body. "Oh God, she's back." His tears fell into her fur, soaking her in the salt of his relief. For a moment, the barn was alive with hope, but the fight was not over. Her breathing was ragged, her body still dangerously cold. Her temperature was falling despite their efforts. "She needs Dr. Peterson," Aaron said, already fumbling for her phone. Mark's face twisted in desperation. "It's 3 a.m. In a blizzard he'll never make it out here. Then we take her to him." Those words cut through fear like a sword. Within minutes, they were in the truck, the roads coated in ice and snow, the storm howling like a wild beast. Nobody lay across Mark's lap in the passenger seat, wrapped in heated blankets, her chest so faint he could barely feel it. Twice, during the 30-minute drive, he thought she was gone again. Twice he cried out in anguish, rubbing her chest, whispering fiercely into her ear, "Stay with us, little girl. You're the fighter, you don't give up. We don't give up." The drive was hell itself, headlights swallowed by snow, tires sliding dangerously close to ditches, Aaron's hands gripping the wheel with white knuckles, her prayers whispered under her breath. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Dr. Peterson met them at the clinic, his own truck having fought through the storm. His diagnosis was grim, severe hypothermia, oxygen deprivation. Another few minutes and we would have lost her permanently. He hooked Nobody to an oxygen tank, placed her beneath specialized heat lamps, monitored her every flicker of movement. For 4 agonizing hours, they held her, breathed with her, prayed over her. Slowly, painfully slowly, her breaths grew steadier, her temperature crept upward, her eyes began to focus. And then, as the sun broke across the horizon, Dr. Peterson spoke words that felt like resurrection. "She's going to make it." By the time they returned to the ranch, the other 3 calves were crying frantically, as if they knew their sister had been gone too long. When they placed Nobody back in the barn, still weak but alive, the reunion was nothing short of divine. The 3 calves surrounded her instantly, nuzzling, pressing their bodies against hers, warming her with their own heat, their small cries like a chorus of welcome. Tears filled Mark's eyes as he whispered, They know what she's been through." He stood back then, looking at the 4 huddled miracles. "That's when I knew," he said later, his voice breaking as he remembered. "That's when I knew they were all going to survive this. They're not just sisters, they're a team, and teams don't leave anyone behind." The crisis of that first night had bound the Van Hastert family to those calves in a way words could barely touch. They had fought death together, and won. From that moment on, Nobody was no longer Nobody. None of them were just livestock anymore. They were family. They were testimony. They were a living sermon about survival, about faith, about the unshakable bond between animals and humanity. For with God nothing shall be impossible. But as Mark and Aaron soon learned, surviving that night was only the beginning. The next 7 days would blur into bottle feedings, 2-hour temperature checks, and sleepless devotion. Yet with every heartbeat, with every breath, the calves reminded them, miracles are real. Somebody, the cow who had once been nameless, cranky, and overlooked, now stood at the center of the Van Hastert family's every breath. Yet miracles, as Mark and Aaron quickly discovered, were not without trial. She had delivered 4 daughters into the storm, for breathing animal miracles that had already gone viral in headlines across Canada and beyond. But within the barn, survival was still fragile, still tested by every ticking hour. Somebody was not accepting her daughters equally. She nudged Orangala and Greenalow close, allowing them the warmth of her body and the nourishment of her milk. But nobody, the smallest fighter who had already clawed her way back from death in Bluthany, fragile and quiet, were pushed aside again and again. Normal, low, critically low. Aaron's voice became a refrain in the stillness of night, her thermometer readings spoken aloud like a chant of warning. The barn had become both battlefield and chapel, where love and exhaustion wrestled, and where every degree of temperature was the difference between life and loss. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. Mark and Aaron carved their lives into shifts, the kind of devotion that stripped them raw. Mark took the midnight to 6 a.m. watch, moving quietly among the calves while the storm raged or the stars hung silent over the Saskatchewan prairie. Aaron covered 6 a.m. to noon, her hands blistered from bottles, her eyes heavy but unyielding. Coffee became their lifeline, whispered prayers their fuel. And yet, by the 3rd day, the cracks began to show. Orangala, the strongest, began shouldering, her sisters aside, greedily pulling at somebody's milk while Bluthany and nobody grew weaker by the hour. We're losing them, Aaron whispered one midnight, her voice breaking as she stroked Bluthany's limp body, the calf barely responsive to touch. The barn, once filled with the sound of tiny bleats and rustling straw, felt unbearably heavy with silence. Exhaustion carved sharp edges into their love, and even the bond between husband and wife strained under the relentless grind of survival. Did you check the thermometer right? Mark snapped once, his voice hoarse from sleeplessness. I checked it 3 times. Aaron shot back, her own voice quivering from fatigue. Survival was not just about calves now, it was about their family holding on, refusing to break. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. They nearly shattered them. Nobody's temperature dropped so low, the thermometer barely registered. Mark stared at the reading, hollow-eyed, his voice nothing but despair. That's it, we can't keep doing this. He felt the crushing weight of failure pressing down, the storm of exhaustion howling louder than any blizzard outside. But then, as if answering him, nobody lifted her tiny head, her eyes impossibly clear, impossibly determined, locked on his. It was not a calf's gaze, it was a mirror of every fight they had poured into her. She's not done, Aaron whispered, her own tears catching the heat lamp's glow. In that moment, a spark returned to Mark's weary heart. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. The breakthrough came on day 5-2. Greenalow, the quiet middle sister, positioned herself between Orangala and nobody, refusing to let the bully shove her weakest sibling away any longer. Mark and Aaron watched in stunned silence as Greenalow used her small body like a shield, guarding nobody in Bluthany with a determination that mirrored their own. They're learning, Aaron whispered, her exhaustion melting into awe. They're learning to work together, and so they did. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the temperatures stabilized. Normal, slightly low, but steady. It was the rhythm of survival, a fragile but beautiful symphony playing in the barn. By day 7, the calves had created their own order, alliances, roles, and a bond that could not be broken. Orangala, once a selfish bully, softened under the watchful presence of her sisters. Greenalow became the quiet protector. Bluthany found her voice in the safety of their huddle. And nobody, the one who had already crossed death's shadow, refused to let go of life. By the time spring sunlight filtered through the barn windows, coats glossy, and eyes bright with health, the impossible had become reality. The 4 sisters played together in the straw, nipping, leaping, and curling against one another, as if nothing had ever threatened them. Somebody once reluctant, once unfair, now stood proudly, her head raised high, finally embracing all 4 daughters. With the quiet dignity of a mother who had learned love through trial, with supplemental feeding and relentless human devotion, she had found her way. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. 6 weeks later, Dr. Peterson's boots crunched over the gravel of the ranch drive. He walked into the barn, his stethoscope gleaming, his face breaking into a grin as he examined each calf. All 4 are thriving, he announced. I'm documenting this case for the veterinary journals. This survival rate defies every statistical model we have. Agricultural researchers arrived soon after, eager to study the genetics behind the rare quadruplet birth. Television crews set up cameras to document the famous calves' growth, their story traveling across continents like a wildfire of hope. Viral YouTube clips captured them bounding in straw, and millions clicked to watch. Headlines screamed words like animal miracle, touching animal story, heartwarming animal video, an unbelievable survival against all odds. And then spring truly arrived. Somebody now, a matriarch in her own right, led her 4 daughters into green pastures for the first time. The other cattle seemed puzzled at first, heads turning in confusion at the 4 identical calves leaping in unison. But soon they accepted them, as if nature itself had made peace with the impossible. Mark and Aaron stood hand in hand by the fence, watching the sisters chase each other through the tall grass, sunlight gleaming off their glossy coats. "You know the best part?" Aaron said, her eyes misty as laughter bubbled in her chest. "We both lost that bet about the fence, but we gained something infinitely more precious." Mark nodded, wrapping his arm around her shoulders as the 4 calves ran wild in the pasture. One cranky cow with no name became somebody who changed our lives forever, and so it was. A miracle born of snow and storm, of exhaustion and prayer, of CPR in the darkest night, and of a love that refused to surrender. Their story spread across the world, bringing visitors from 6 continents to a quiet Saskatchewan ranch. But for Mark and Aaron, the miracle was not the cameras, not the headlines, not the statistics. It was the sight of 4 calves alive, thriving, and forever bound together, a living testimony that sometimes, against all odds, the impossible becomes beautifully real. Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. In the end, it wasn't just about 4 fragile calves fighting against impossible odds, or 2 exhausted men pushing themselves past the brink of sleep. Insanity, it was about the reminder that life is worth fighting for, even when the world says the chances are too small. Nobody, the calf who nearly slipped away, became the heartbeat of the story, teaching them that sometimes the weakest among us carry the greatest strength. And somebody, the cranky cow who had no name, became more than a mother. She became living proof that love can grow where it was never expected. Looking out across the pasture that spring, watching for once dying calves leap through the sunlight as though the cold and the struggle had never existed, Mark and Aaron realized this wasn't just survival, it was a miracle written into the fabric of their lives. And maybe that's the truth hidden in the fields and barns of this world, that the impossible isn't something to fear, but something to embrace. Because sometimes, if you hold on just a little longer, the miracle you prayed for comes running to you on unsteady legs, with eyes bright and full of life.